Welcome to the Social Data Science Center SoDa Symposium titled Educational Data Science in the Measurement, Statistics, and Evaluation Program at the University of Maryland. My name is Chris Antone. I'll be moderating today's session. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the SoDa website next week. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentations. So please use the Q&A feature at any time during the symposium to ask your questions. If you would like the opportunity to ask your question live, please note that in your question and you'll be called on and unmuted during the Q&A portion. Now I'd like to introduce our presenters for today, Tracy, Laura, and Manqian. Tracy Sweet is an associate professor in the Measurement, Statistics, and Evaluation program in the Department of Human Development and Quantitative Methodology. Her research focuses on methods for social network analysis with particular focus on multi-level social network models. She serves as the Associate Director of Research for UMCP for the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center and currently oversees projects on applying data science and statistical methods on large-scale educational data. She completed her Ph.D. in statistics at Carnegie Mellon University and MA in mathematics at Morgan State University. Our next speaker will be Laura Stapleton. Laura is the Interim Dean for the College of Education. She is also a professor in measurement, statistics, and evaluation in the Department of Human Development and Quantitative Methodology at the University of Maryland, and is the director of the NSF-funded Quantitative Research Methods Scholar Program, which trains 20 early career scholars who focus on STEM education, equity, and access. Prior to earning her PhD in measurement, statistics, and evaluation, she was an economist at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and subsequently conducted educational research at the American Association of State Colleges and Universities and as Associate Director of Institutional Research at the University of Maryland. And finally, our third speaker today will be Manqian Liao. Manqian is a psychometrician at Duolingo. Currently, her work focuses on conducting validity research on the Duolingo English test, including developing and improving the quality assurance process of the test and conducting differential item functioning studies. She got her PhD degree in measurement, statistics, and evaluation from the University of Maryland in 2020. And her research interests include item response theory, cognitive diagnostic modeling, as well. And she is passionate about utilizing her expertise to find innovative solutions to improve validity and fairness of the test scores in applied settings. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to the presenters.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share my slides when I'm not on the beginning. Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm excited to talk about educational data science with our program, Measurement, Statistics, and Evaluation. Again, I'm Tracy Sweet. And in case, oh, I'm not sure why it's not moving. I have to adjust this way, okay. And in case you missed our fall presentation on the Measurement, Statistics, and Evaluation program, I'm just going to get you caught up to speed in the next minute or two. So we are actually in the process of changing our name. So our future name will be Quantitative Methodology, Measurement, and Statistics. And where does our program live? We are part of the College of Education within the Department of Human Development and Quantitative Methodology. Our program, Quantitative Methodology, Measurement, and Statistics, formerly known as Measurement, Statistics, and Evaluation. That's where we are. So just a quick summary of what in the world quantitative methodology is all about. Programs in quantitative methodology tend to emphasize a couple of aspects of maybe what we would think of as social science or educational research, as well as data analysis and inference. So for example, in quantitative methodology programs, we tend to focus on measurement and assessment methods and models. So how do we measure something? How do we quantify whether something is a good measure of something else? We also focus a lot on research design and experimentation. So how do we design a study? How do we craft a survey? That sort of thing. As well as your standard data analysis, statistical model, parameter estimation and interpretation. And kind of an overarching theme on our work is this idea of causal inference, right? We want to know why things are the way they are. And so as a result, I would say people in quantitative methods programs tend to focus on research about the development of new methods and models. This involves a lot of simulation-based approaches. It tends to be pretty common in quantitative methodology programs. And our goal is really to answer complex research questions in the social sciences using quantitative methods. As a result, because of our where we are in today's technology, this involves a lot of programming in software such as R and Python. So that's kind of quantitative methodology in a nutshell. And today I'm really excited to talk about 3 projects, although I guess the last one isn't technically a project, but more talking about a career. So I'm going to start by talking about some of the work that I'm working on with the Maryland Longitudinal Data Systems Center. Laura will follow. We'll talk about the work she's doing with Baltimore City Public Schools. And then one of our former students, Manqian, will talk about her work at Duolingo. So let's talk about the Maryland Longitudinal Data Systems Center. Okay. So the goal, or the purpose of the Maryland Longitudinal Data Systems Center, I will use the acronym MLDS moving forward, is to provide information about students to improve the state's educational system. So what is MLDS? MLDS houses a data repository, and it links student data across a bunch of different agencies. So we have K-12 data from the Maryland State Department of Education. We have post-secondary education. This would be community college and for your institution data from the Maryland Higher Education Commission. Workforce data from the Department of Labor Licensing and Regulation, along with some student corrections data from the Department of Juvenile Services. All of this information is linked at the student level. So as a result, we have millions of student records dating back from about 2007 to now. And among these records, we have about several hundred variables. I also want to give a special shout out to people that are on the call. 2 of our PhD students, Brennan Register and Patrick Sheehan, are here, and they are working on this project with me. So let me tell you a little bit about this project. Because this project has not been formally approved by the Governor Board for the MLDS Center, I'm going to be a little bit vague and just kind of talk about data science in general. And so the purpose of this project is to use machine learning prediction algorithms to see if we can predict student success. And so you can maybe imagine some examples of variables that would be student success. For example, things like graduating from high school or graduating from college or joining the workforce, or even something as simple as obtaining a certain score on a test, for example. And we're interested in whether or not we can actually predict these student success outcomes reasonably well. And so we're looking at whether certain machine learning algorithms do a better job in terms of prediction over other methods, more standard methods, such as parametric statistical models. And why? Why do we want to do this? One reason is because the MLDS data repository has a lot of missing data. We have students that are absent or students that leave the system. And so we might want to be able to predict some of these outcome variables for them. And in addition, we have years, for example, where certain assessments were not used or certain assessments were not given, or certain data were not collected, and we might want to predict student variables for those years. The other purpose could be things like evaluating the effects of state or district policies on some of these student success variables. So for example, if there is a new policy in terms of graduation requirements, either for at the high school level or at the 2-year or 4-year college level, to examine kind of what are the effects on whether or not students are being successful. And we can use machine learning algorithms to help us answer that question as well. So let me talk a little bit about kind of the nuts and bolts of applying some of these algorithms to MLDS data. And just as an example, let's suppose I'm interested in a test, right? So what I would want to do is I'd have to identify students in a particular cohort. We have longitudinal data, but if I'm interested in kind of whether or not students score a certain score on a particular test, for example, I would want to know, I would want to identify a particular year. There are assessments like the SAT that are equated so that they're the same year to year, and they are given every year, but there are also tests that are given by the state of Maryland. And those tests are not the same every year. And certain students take them, then in a certain year, it's a different exam, that sort of thing. So we might need to identify all of the students that took, that were in a particular grade in a particular year, and then figuring out who actually took that test. So we have students that maybe took the test in previous years. Maybe they are taking the test, maybe they took the test previous years, or they took the test late because of whenever they took a particular course. From those students, then we have to identify which test score we want to use. There are situations where students have multiple test scores. And so do we want to use the highest test score, the most recent test score, the first test score, things like that. And then in terms of selecting covariates, our goal with working with MLDS data is to be as representative as possible. I mean, these data represent all students in the state of Maryland, or all students that are kind of traveling us upon a certain trajectory, whatever we're kind of interested in. And so we also have data that has some missingness. And so figuring out, which covariates to include, because obviously with machine learning algorithms, we want to include as many covariates as we can. But with every additional covariate we include, we lose some of our sample due to missingness. And so trying to balance having a representative sample for the state, but also having a lot of variables in the training data set to use. So that is definitely something that we're constantly trying to balance when we are working with MLDS data. Another potential issue is the fact that educational data is nested. And what do I mean by that? In the state of Maryland, we have 23 counties, and the school districts in these counties operate somewhat independently, right? They're driven by kind of the state laws, but each district has their own Board of Education. And then within each county, we have anywhere from 5 to 209 schools. So as an example, I just gave 4 elementary schools kind of in our area that are close to the university in Prince George's County. But there are, 209 schools in this particular county. And within each school, we have anywhere from 5 to hundreds of classes per school. Within each class, we have anywhere from 10 to 40 or more students. And the idea is we know that students tend to go to schools with other students in their neighborhoods. Primarily, we know that classes are not randomly assigned always. And so there is this issue in that students are more similar maybe within a class or within a school than students across schools or across classrooms would be. Okay. And so something that we need to investigate with MLDS data is if we have classroom, school, and district covariates in our data set, can we then ignore this nested data structure? Right? Is it safe to say that the dependence within classrooms or within schools or within districts can be ignored with enough covariates? The second question is then, do these ML algorithms lead to better prediction accuracy than some of the more parametric models that account for this nested data structure? So something like multi-level modeling or multi-level logistic regression. So here are some results. And again, we're going to be a little bit vague with the outcome, but if it's helpful, we can think of a binary outcome of student success. So are the students successful? Yes or no? And we're looking at whether or not we classified those students accurately. So here are 3 kind of machine learning algorithms. On the right, lasso, classification trees, and random forests. On the left, we have kind of the modal classification, meaning if we just put everybody in one group based on the most popular group, right, of success versus not success, and logistic regression. And you can see that logistic regression, lasso, and random forests produce the highest classification accuracy. Classification trees are a little bit lower, but all 4 of them are better than just using the modal classification. So we might think, yeah, we're doing a great job. This is 85%. We're classifying students correctly. But I would argue that's 15% of students in our data set that we're not classifying correctly. That means we're misclassifying students as being successful or not successful with these methods. That also brings up this idea of some ethical considerations, right? So 15% of our students are being misclassified. Are all types of students being misclassified equally or classified equally well? So for example, these algorithms could be doing a really great job for certain races of students and a terrible job for other races of students. This is important. This is important ethically, but it's also important in terms of how we can use these results in the future. Same thing for, by gender, by grade of the student, by ELL status, farm status, free and reduced price meal status, as well as the county. We might be predicting student success really, really well in certain counties, and terribly in other counties. So these are all things that we need to investigate and examine. And maybe there's a way to kind of combine results so that we can actually select certain methods based on which groups of students are being classified well. That's something else to think about is do our results vary by method, right? So are random forests particularly good at classifying students well across race, but maybe they do worse for classifying across counties, things like that. These are all things that we still need to investigate and kind of nail down in terms of how we want to use these methods. So we are currently a work in progress. This particular project is very much a work in progress. We're still looking at kind of which algorithm is most accurate for particular types of students. We have presented results for one sample. And so thinking about what other samples we would want to use, what other predictors we want to use. As I said, that there is this balance between selecting predictors and keeping a representative sample. So, can we go in one direction or the other and still also achieve similar results or better results? As I mentioned before, there might be a way to leverage classification accuracy across different groups. So if we know that one algorithm is better for certain groups, is there a way to kind of pool that information? Similarly, are we doing any better than parametric models? Our original results suggest that logistic regression is doing just as well, but could we do even better if we were doing something like multi-level logistic regression, for example? And then finally, if we can actually predict student outcomes or student success measures accurately, how can and should these predictions be used to support future research? We might have really great classification, but there are additional things that we need to think about in terms of using these predictions in future analyses. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Laura.
Thank you, Tracy. Hello, everyone. I see some familiar names on the attendee list. So hello, Carolyn, hello, Bess, and others. I want to talk about a project that's fairly applied. As Tracy mentioned, in our program, we do a lot of simulation research. But that tells us how statistical estimation methods and models work in a very sterile lab sort of situation. But these applied projects really help us figure out if these methods work in the real world. So in this project, City Schools Achievement and Accountability Office partnered with us. They are tasked for reporting and overseeing school performance. And that city schools, Baltimore City Schools are referred to as city schools. That office is part of the Baltimore Education Research Consortium. This is a group of universities that work with city schools. Burke is currently located at Johns Hopkins University. That's the hub. But we're investigating alternative indicators of school quality. And I have photos there of Chris Wan and Liepa Bogaran are both at the Accountability Office. And we have awesome PhD students, Yifeng and Ashani Jayasekara. E is with us. I think Ashani ran off to teach. So, and we're partially funded by AERA to do this work. So next slide. So this project I've characterized as sort of a conditioning task. We're trying to adjust metrics for some level of dissimilarity. And you'll see what I mean shortly. And we're also thinking, can we identify a subgroup of smaller institutions that should be compared as opposed to all of the institutions? And most importantly, when we're working in the real world, are these methods transparent, understandable, and perceived as fair by stakeholders? Because if the answer is no, even though the methods may work wonderfully, they're not going to be utilized. So, and the purpose here is schools need to be determined whether they provide quality education. And so often they are rated within a district and across the state. And part of what we're doing is trying to create a method to identify schools that are models and some that perhaps are not models and need to seek the assistance of those that are models. Next slide. So currently, as many of you in the audience may be just thinking about using data to do cool stuff, data science, and you're not that familiar with rankings, but if you can hit the button, Tracy. Rankings are made all the time from extant data. You have rankings of hospitals, US News and World Report rankings of universities, lawyers, best places to work, best plastic surgeons. All of these rankings that get all of the sexy media coverage. I don't know why that's my gesticulation for sexy, but the sexy media coverage use extant data. And so there's data just sitting out there that anybody can grab and start ranking things and get money because they're selling these rankings. I think my internet is unstable. So can you hear me, Tracy? Yeah, okay. So this is about rankings of schools. If you go to the next slide, the Maryland School Report Card exists in the state of Maryland, and they rate all schools on a 5-star system. And I want to walk you through the 4 sets of indicators that they use. The first is academic achievement. So they look at performance, kind of average performance of the students in a school on standardized tests of English language and math. They also look at progress in achieving English language proficiency. So for those students who are English learner students in a school, what % are on track to achieve proficiency? They look at academic progress, which is performance compared to prior performance, so growth percentiles. And they also look at what they call school quality and student success. So, and the measures there currently are % of students not chronically absent and who are enrolled in a well-rounded curriculum. We're going to come back and talk a little bit more about these indicators shortly, but if we look on the next slide, I want to show you the distribution of those 5 stars across the various counties in Maryland. And it's kind of questionable to use box plots for something that is ordinal, 1 through 5, but it does the trick for me. If you'll notice, and hit the slide, you'll notice the Baltimore City at the far right, more than half of them are rated as 1 or 2 stars, and 8% are rated, only 8% are rated as 4 or 5 stars. Whereas across the rest of Maryland, 61% are rated at 4 or 5 stars. Well, why is that? Is Baltimore City schools, are they that horrible compared with these other schools? Well, let's go to the next slide and want to relook at those indicators that are being used. Okay. Basically, most of these indicators are proxies for home resources. Okay. If you live in a 2-parent household with both have high incomes, you as a student are going to do quite well on your standardized tests in English language and mathematics. So this is a status measure of the students within a school. And schools do not all receive a random selection of students in the schools. There are various differences in that, what I call kind of a market basket of students who go to specific schools. The next bullet down, progress in achieving English language proficiency. Again, this is just a status measure of the English language learner students in a school and how well they are going toward proficiency. The item in red, performance compared to prior performance, that is the only measure that is being used that controls for the inputs or what the students bring to the school. And that accounts for less than 30% of the overall star rating. Okay. So here's the problem right now is the current ratings of schools in Maryland are overall rewarding those schools that have resource students coming in the door. Let's go to the next slide. So we're partnering with Baltimore City Schools to try to determine whether we can come up with better measures of school quality that they can use. So note that this is just the Baltimore City schools. So there's 125 elementary schools that we're working on this first analysis on. But there are thousands of schools across the state. So we're just narrowing in to the 125 in Baltimore. One approach is referred to as value-added modeling. There's many different models that can be used. So this is just one example where we have some outcome, perhaps math assessment, their math score. And it's a function of a set of P predictors that are at the student level for student I and school J. And so we control, therefore, for what the inputs are. So we may have prior student performance on math assessment. We may have prior attendance that the student has going into math assessment. We could have the family income. And so we condition on those variables. And then the school intercept and or school slopes are a function of some sort of school level variables. If you want, maybe there's a contextual effect where if you're in a school that, excuse me, has a high level of student absence in general, that may affect your performance even more. And then with these models comes, and hit the button, Tracy. With these models come an assumption about your distribution of your residuals, and you can change those assumptions. But of interest in this sort of model is, hit the button, that random effect on the intercept of a school. And that random effect is considered the value added for a given school. That if you have a high value of the U0J, that means that kids in that school did better than expected given their inputs. And so if you go to the next slide, we can look at, excuse me, for the 125 city schools, these are their value added scores. So those, for right now, ignore the yellow and purple dots there, just assume that they are blue dots. We have a set of blue dots that are rank ordered by their value added, which is on the y-axis. And I've added in, well, technically Ashani added in the confidence interval around that value added estimate. And we can see here that yes, we can sort of rank the schools by their value added toward a student's math score, but there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of imprecision in these estimates. Also note that we're going to pay special attention to 11 of these schools, and those are the special colored dots. And that first one on the right, the yellow one, that for the Maryland state reporting is a 2-star school. And then the next one on the right, the next yellow one on the right side, thank you, Tracy, that's a 1-star school. So, you know, relative to everything else, every other school in Baltimore City, it's doing rather well in terms of math outcomes given its inputs. But the Maryland report card gave it a 1-star. So value-added modeling has been criticized because it makes what's referred to as heroic assumptions. One is manipulability, that any observation within a cluster, within a school, could be in any other cluster. And as you may know, you can't just take a student from one school and throw them into another school. That just doesn't happen. So that's one of the assumptions. And the other assumption is that our model that we just had there is the correct functional form. And sometimes it's not, and that's an untestable assumption because you may not have the data to support that test of whether it's a correct form. So we're looking at potentially another method, and go hit the button. And the use of propensity score weighting. This technique is often used in when you have observational data, but you're interested in what would have happened had it been an experimental treatment. So suppose you had 2 schools, for example, and you could not randomly assign students to one of the 2 schools. Now, you had to treat them as pre-existing. But we can compare one with the other by equating the 2 on the types of students that have attended both of them, or that could have attended either of them. And that has to do with calculating a student's propensity to enroll in a school. So you come up with a propensity model. And in the figure below, I just have an example set of schools with the propensity distribution plotted. And suppose we wanted to compare that grade in school. So the third from the right, we're interested in saying, how does that rank relative to all the other schools in the state? Well, we could examine what is your propensity to enroll in that school, and what are all the other kids who are in other schools' propensity to enroll in that target school. And that is what's being plotted. And you can see here that that 7th school from the right, that in no way should ever be compared, the one at the bottom there, that school should not be compared with that target school that's in gray, because they all have extremely small propensities to enroll in that target gray school, because the students are unlikely totally different. They all may have a lot of money, and they had high scores before, last year, and they all attended school, and it shouldn't be compared with the gray school. And I should mention that this propensity score model includes all those inputs that we talked about in the value-added model, covariates. So our thought is that once you evaluate these propensity distributions, you select a set of schools that have similar inputs, and you only compare among those schools. Turn the page. And then once you have only selected those schools, you can do propensity score weighting. So you come up with weighted outcome measures, and those are weighted by a function of the propensity score itself. And there's various options: weighting by the odds, inverse probability of treatment weighting, or generalized overlap weighting. And in this case, what you're doing is you're weighting the market basket of students, so that for a comparison school, it makes all those students look like the students who are in the target school. So next slide. So this is just an example. When using the generalized overlap weighting, we compared target school in light blue, 548, and their math achievement and their math score with the other comparison schools that have reasonable overlap. And it's in 7th place or something. It's in the middle of the pack. Interestingly, in the value-added modeling side, Those yellow and the purple dot represents school 548. And those yellow dots suggest that, oh, value-added modeling would have put that purple school higher up in the rank ordering. So maybe that model is possibly misspecified that we use from value-added modeling. So this is just a quick high overview of what we're working on. The next slide. So this is an ongoing project. We're meeting often with our colleagues in Baltimore City. Clarity, anytime you create some sort of ranking or rating, you need to have clarity on what the purpose is, what's its use. And having that stakeholder input every month is key. And just to speak out to the data science folks who just want to use data to create things, just remember, anybody can create a composite from a set of values. All you have to do is know how to multiply and add. But making that useful is a very different type of activity. All right, and I'm going to turn it over now to Manqian.
Can everyone see my screen okay? All right, thanks. Hi everyone, I'm Nancy. It's a great pleasure to join you at the SoDa Symposium today. I'm a psychometrician, and today I would like to share some of the research that we do at Duolingo and also my trajectory from transferring from a PhD student to a psychometrician. So a little bit more about myself. So I did my master's and PhD degree at the Measurement Statistics and Evaluation program since 2015. I'm going to use this acronym EDMS for the rest of my presentation because I keep using it. But as Dr. Sweet mentioned, that this may subject to change later. So my research interests are mainly in item response theory and cognitive diagnostic modeling. During my study at the EDMS, in addition to taking a wide range of courses that gave me a very powerful toolkit, I felt very lucky to have extra hands-on experience to practice my skills in the real life settings. So I worked as a research assistant at the Maryland Assessment Research Center for over 3 years and did summer internships at 2 testing organizations. So all these experiences made me very passionate about applying what I learned from school to finding innovative solutions to improve the test fairness, security, and quality. And they further motivated me to pursue a career in the testing industry. Therefore, since I graduated in 2020, I've started to work as a psychometrician at Duolingo. The Duolingo is an educational tech company with its headquarters in Pittsburgh, which is where I'm located right now. So to begin with, I would like to give you a bit of context on what type of test that we are working on as psychometricians. So right now, we are mainly working on this test called Duolingo English Test. It is a high stakes and computerized adaptive learning assessment. So it is used for assessing people's English proficiency. The test was first developed back in 2017, and its mission is to use assessment technology to lower the barriers and increase the opportunities for English language learners across the world. That being said, one of the major features of the test is its accessibility. The test administration is completely remote, and test takers do not have to travel to a specific test centers at a certain location in order to take the test. Instead, they can take the test simply use a personal computer with an internet connection. The plots on the right just demonstrate how much more accessible the Duolingo English test is compared to the test center-based test. So the major mission of psychometricians at Duolingo are to develop the psychometric methodologies for the Duolingo English test in order to maintain and improve the score validity. And there are many reasons why I was attracted to this position during my job search. So one of it is that the test is a high stakes test. The test scores are used in various settings, including post-secondary admission. So at the moment, the test scores have been used by over 3,000 institutions over the world to make their admission decision. So I can get a sense of how much the scores have impacted people's life. So which makes me feel that the work that I'm doing is important and meaningful and keeps me motivated. And another reason is that the test is very different from the traditional assessments. It is continuously delivered online. People can take the test whenever they want and at like anywhere in the world. And the items are generated and scored automatically. Therefore, this test comes with new challenges in psychometrics. So I feel very thrilled to find the innovative solutions to these new challenges. Okay. And I think a lot of the technical knowledge and research skills that I acquired from the EDMS program are transferable and applicable to what I do as a psychometrician. For instance, one of the major research questions that we are very interested in is how to estimate the item difficulty for a large item bank and in an adaptive testing setting. So then I find the knowledge that I have, that I learned about item calibration, item analysis, and testing theory to very helpful when it comes to finding solutions to this kind of research question. And then we are also trying to improve the efficiency of the adaptive item selection algorithm. So the theory that I learned from the computerized adaptive testing course and the Monte Carlo simulation techniques have really kicked in. And then when we try to evaluate the reliability, validity, and comparability of the test scores, I could use the measurement theory, factor analysis, and a bunch of data visualization skills to tackle this kind of problems. So next, I'm going to give a brief example to just try to give you a flavor of what type of research questions that we are trying to tackle. So one of the major tasks that we need to do is to estimate the item difficulty. This process is also referred to as item calibration in many cases. In the traditional test development process, the item calibration is often done by conducting many pilot testings, followed up with some psychometric analysis, like fitting an IRT model or so. So intuitively, items that get answered correctly by more test takers in the pilot testing will be assigned to as an easier item. And so, but this process usually works well when the item pool is relatively small, which is also often the case where items are written by human. But in the Duolingo English test, the test items are automatically generated and the item pool is pretty large. Implementing this whole process can be very time-consuming and expensive, if not impossible. Therefore, we need to look for a more efficient way to estimate the item parameters. So the workaround that we came up with is to use the item's linguistic features, which can be automatically extracted using the natural language processing techniques to inform the item difficulty. For example, we need to estimate the difficulty level of a bunch of words. So these words will be used in some item that ask test takers to recognize, to distinguish the real English words from the fake English words. So in theory, the words that are more linguistically complex, such as more characters and syllables, would tend to be more difficult to recognize. So the proposed item calibration process is built utilizing this principle. But because of the time limits, I'm not going to elaborate on all the details. But on a very high level, how we do this is we try to train a machine learning model using the difficulty labels that the language experts assign to the words. So the language labels are based on the CEFR level. So for the context, the CEFR level refers to the Common European Framework of Reference for Language. So it is standards to describe the language ability. So we convert this human labeled difficulty level into a numeric scale. And then we train this machine learning model to build the mapping between the human labeled difficulty and the linguistic features. And then when we have a new set of items, which we don't have the human labeled difficulty, but we can extract their linguistic features using the NLP techniques, we can apply the machine learning model we just learned to predict their difficulty level. So we use this item calibration process to calibrate a large number of items without a very high cost in time and in resources. But certainly this method is not perfect, and we are continue improving on it. And so back to the work life at Duolingo, we do have other responsibilities other than research, statistical research. I think most of the times these responsibilities are as important as the research itself. And I feel very grateful that I had experience working on similar tasks when I was at school at the EDMS program. For example, we usually have the need to share our research with the broader research community by presenting at various conferences. So at school, I used to participate in the EDMS research days and multiple conferences in this field. And I think all these experiences really paid off by honing the presentation skills that I really need at work. And sometimes we also need to communicate with the stakeholders. In our case, the school admission officers, teachers, and students to help them understand the test scores. But these stakeholders are not really very savvy in statistics. So we need to explain the work that we do in a very plain language. So it really makes me recall that I did get exposed to this very authentic working experience by being assigned to work as a statistical consultant for real clients through a data analysis course at the EDMS. And other activities like preparing technical report and journal manuscript also reminded me of similar activities at school. So finally, I would like to wrap up with some of my reflections from this nearly 2-year experience of working in the industry. I think the work as a psychometrician shares a lot of similarities as the work that I've done at the EDMS. Sometimes finding the solution to a practical research question feels like a course project to me. And I really appreciate that I got to be trained to have this mindset that, oh, there is not really a standard correct answer to these research questions, and I need to do my best to provide the rationales to justify the proposals or decisions that I make. I think this way of thinking really gives me the resilience to work on many new and challenging problems. And finally, I think that these soft skills like communication and time management are as important as the technical knowledge in the psychometrician or educational data science career. Yeah, that's all for me today. Thank you again for having me.
Great. Thank you very much to all of the presenters. Before we open the floor for questions, please join me in thanking our presenters, either by applauding out loud where you are, or maybe virtually with a Zoom applause emoji. So. Great. So if you have questions, you can type them into the Q&A feature. And if you would like the opportunity to ask your question out loud, please note that in your question so that you can be unmuted in Zoom. Let me check the Q&A now. Okay, looks like we have a question from Patrick. He says, it says, I realize Duolingo has to make money, but it seems like they could avoid a lot of cleaning time by modeling selection of cases. What English learner can afford to take the English test, i.e. probably the choice of inclusion is biased on the upper income cases. And then we have another question that might be related to that. Is the Duolingo English test meant to serve a similar purpose to TOEFL? So it seems like these questions are directed at Manci. I don't know if you could answer either of those.
Sure. So for Patrick's question, if I'm understanding correctly, you maybe answer that could this test to be too expensive for some test takers to afford. So I would say, like, compared to other English proficiency tests that serve to similar purpose for college admission, the price of the Duolingo English test is relatively lower than other tests. So it's like about $50 for test takers to take the test. So yeah, and yeah, so I hope this will answer your questions. And for Carolyn's question, is Duolingo English test meant to serve a similar purpose to TOEFL? So I think it's used in some similar ways by certain stakeholders, but the test is developed motivated by the fact that we hope the English learners from all over the world to be able to take the test anywhere. They do not have to be limited by their location. So it's not like it's designed to have the same purpose of TOEFL, but it happens to be used in a similar way. Yeah.
Great. If other people have questions, you can type them into the Q&A feature. Just as a reminder, the Q&A feature is different from the chat, so you can look for the Q&A icon in Zoom. And as I check now, I see Patrick thanked you for your answer. And Caroline asked a follow-up question. How many schools are using this English test?
Right. So right now, over 3,000 institutions across the world is using the test.
Wow, Caroline said. Great. If others have questions, please type them now. And while we wait, I'll just take an opportunity to ask Laura a question. I thought it was really interesting at the end of your presentation, you mentioned that these composite measures or these rankings need to be transparent in order to be usable. Like people need to be able to understand how they were, how you went about computing the metric or generating the metric. So I was just curious if you've gotten any feedback about that yet with your value added approach. Have you had a chance to describe this to a lay audience and get their reactions to this method?
Interestingly, and the folks who we're working with right now in the office are already, I'm going to turn off my camera. Sorry, I have unstable internet. The folks from the office are pretty statistically savvy, and they actually like the value-added modeling approach over the propensity score, sort of subsetting groups of institutions. I mean, part of that is that subsetting institutions into sort of fairly similar groups does not allow you to evaluate all of the schools in one fell swoop. So that they like the value-added modeling. The problem is once we go out and talk to the principals and other school district leaders, I think we'll have a different reaction to the value-added modeling approach.
On that note, there's a question. Laura, I loved your presentation on the school rankings. Does it appear that people in government are listening to your points about comparability and providing resources accordingly? Was a follow-up comment.
Hi, Carolyn. I think that folks in government, I think they recognize it, that it's an issue of you can't just evaluate status of institutions, but measure growth. The problem is, again, it's a lot of times these rankings are parents are now the stakeholder. So we're now even one level removed from who needs to interpret these. So I think we're moving in that direction, Carolyn. And I believe that at least in the state of Maryland, where there's something now called the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, which is $4 billion legislation that was passed last year and is being implemented, they are putting the money behind the growth percentile measures. I mean, putting the money as in giving money to schools, both for those where there is no growth. They're providing incentives for teachers, nationally board certified teachers, to go teach in those schools that are the lowest performing based on the growth percentiles. So that's a complicated answer to a complicated question.
Great, thank you. Carolyn said that's good to hear, thanks. Maybe we have time for just one more question. Looks like this last one is for Tracy. It's about the models that were presented. It's a long question. I'll try to read it quickly. I'm not into education statistics, so please forgive. The nestedness seems to put the researcher at a disadvantage initially. It's like biting off more than can be analyzed. The correlations build up when you miss controlling for the variance at each level. Suggestion is to begin bottom up, regress micro level with absolute known covariates, then in turn, not just hierarchical, but within and between hierarchy. Would that be preferable initially? I don't know if you have any reactions to that, Tracy.
I'm not entirely sure what the about the question. So, I mean, the issue is that because of the nested structure, just taking all students as if they were from a simple random sample, and treating them as if they were a simple random sample causes issues, right? So we could take all students that ignore classroom, schools, district, and throw them into our algorithm, but we're ignoring some correlations, right? That students within the same classroom, within the same school, within the same district are more similar than students across districts. So even if we ignore the hierarchy and we start kind of only at the student level, we're treating data that are not independent as if they were independent. And so there are some issues with that. I don't actually know in terms of like the ML algorithms exactly what the results would be, but I mean, in parametric models, you end up with overinflated type 1 errors and biased parameter estimates. So I would assume that you'd come into similar issues for the machine learning algorithms as well. But that is currently what we're doing. And we just have to kind of accept that as a limitation for right now.
Okay, great. So I see we're at time. So I'd again like to thank our three presenters today. I thought it was a great session. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming. It was a good turnout today. So I'll just remind you that if you'd like updates about upcoming workshop events, please visit the SoDa Center website. And as you can see on the slide that's currently up, the inaugural SoDa Center workshop will be held in the fall in September 20th and 21st. More information about the workshop will be announced on the SoDa website. So if you're interested, please go there for more information. Thanks everyone for your time. Have a good rest of your day.